The divorce papers lay scattered across the marble kitchen island like fallen leaves, each page a testament to 7 years of what Victoria Chen now considered wasted time. She signed the final document with a flourish, her Mont Blanc pen gliding across the signature line with practiced elegance. "That's it then," she said, sliding the papers across to Daniel Park, who sat quietly on the opposite bar stool, still wearing his faded jeans and the threadbare sweater she'd always hated. 7 years and this is all you're taking? The apartment can barely fit one person, Daniel. Daniel looked up from the papers, his dark eyes unreadable. "It's all I need, Victoria. I'm not interested in fighting over money." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed in their penthouse. "Of course you're not. You never were interested in money. That was always the problem, wasn't it?" She gestured around their luxury apartment, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline. "I built all of this while you played around with your little tech hobby in the garage. Do you know how embarrassing it was telling people my husband was essentially unemployed? I had a job, Victoria. I was developing what? Dreams, fantasies?" She cut him off, pouring herself a glass of Chateau Margaux, the $500 bottle she'd been saving. Tonight felt like a celebration. "I'm about to close the biggest deal of my career. Chen Industries is partnering with Titan Corp for an $800 million development project. $800 million, Daniel. And where will you be? In some tiny apartment still coding whatever pointless app you think will change the world?" Daniel stood, gathering his copy of the papers. He was tall, she'd forgotten how tall, and even in his shabby clothes he carried himself with a quiet dignity that had once attracted her. Now it just irritated her. "I hope the deal works out for you," he said softly. "I really do. Of course it will work out. I don't fail." She took a long sip of wine, savoring the victory. "My lawyer said you didn't even ask for alimony. Stupid, but I suppose I should thank you for that small mercy." "I don't need your money, Victoria. I never did." She rolled her eyes. "Right. Good luck surviving on whatever you make from freelance coding or teaching or whatever it is you do now. Maybe you should have paid more attention to building a real career instead of chasing pipe dreams." Daniel paused at the door, his hand on the handle. For a moment she thought he might say something. Defend himself, argue, show some spark of the passion she'd fallen in love with in college. Instead he simply smiled, a strange, knowing smile that sent an unexpected chill down her spine. "You always were bad at reading people, Victoria. That's going to catch up with you someday." The door closed behind him with a soft click and Victoria was alone in her penthouse. She refilled her wine glass, pushing away the uncomfortable flutter in her chest. What did he mean by that? She was excellent at reading people. It's how she'd climbed the corporate ladder so quickly. How she'd made herself indispensable at Chen Industries. How she'd networked her way into the Titan Corp deal. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. "Titan Corp meeting confirmed for next week. CEO will be present. Final contracts to be signed at celebration dinner." "This is it, boss." Victoria smiled, raising her glass to her reflection in the darkened window. This was her moment. She'd worked for this her entire adult life, sacrificing everything, including apparently her marriage. But it was worth it. Daniel would fade into obscurity with his failed dreams and modest lifestyle, while she would soar to heights he couldn't imagine. She thought about his parting words again and laughed. Bad at reading people? She'd just read their entire relationship perfectly. He was dead weight holding her back and she'd cut him loose at exactly the right time. In 1 week, she'd signed the deal that would cement her legacy. What she didn't know was that Daniel Park was also preparing for that meeting. The week passed in a blur of final preparations, presentations and sleepless nights. Victoria threw herself into work with renewed energy, her divorce feeling less like an ending and more like the shedding of an old skin. She was emerging as something new, something powerful. Chen Industries had been courting Titan Corp for 18 months. The deal would transform her company from a regional player into a national powerhouse. Victoria had personally handled every detail, every negotiation, every compromise. This was her baby, her masterpiece. On the morning of the signing, she stood before her mirror adjusting the collar of her tailored Armani suit. Charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes paired with Louboutin heels that added 3 inches to her 5'6" frame. Her black hair was pulled into a sleek bun, her makeup flawless. She looked like success incarnated. Her phone rang. Richard Chen, her CEO and distant cousin, sounded jubilant. "Victoria, today's the day. The Titan Corp team is already here. Their CEO is joining us for lunch. Then we'll do the formal signing ceremony followed by the celebration dinner tonight. How are you feeling? Ready, she said simply. More than ready. The morning meeting went perfectly. Lawyers reviewed the final contracts, finding nothing amiss. Victoria presented the implementation timeline to applause. By noon, everyone was in high spirits, ready for the ceremonial signing. I have to say, Richard whispered to her as they waited for the Titan Corp CEO to arrive. I've heard he's young. Took over the company just 6 months ago after some internal shakeup. But he's apparently brilliant. The company's stock has risen 30% since he took charge. Victoria nodded absently, reviewing her notes. She'd done her research on Titan Corp, but had focused more on the company's structure and assets than its new leadership. Names and faces were less important than numbers and contracts. The conference room doors opened, and Victoria looked up with her practiced smile, ready to greet the man who would change her life. The smile froze on her face. Daniel Park walked into the room, wearing an impeccably tailored Tom Ford suit, his hair styled, his presence commanding. Behind him trailed a group of executives in matching corporate attire, all deferring to him with the unmistakable body language of subordinates addressing their superior. Good afternoon, Daniel said, his voice carrying easily across the room. I apologize for the mystery. When I took over Titan Corp 6 months ago, I preferred to keep a low profile during the transition, but I'm very pleased to finally meet with you all in person to finalize this partnership. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. The room seemed to tilt slightly. This was impossible. Daniel, the unemployed dreamer, the man she'd divorced a week ago for having no ambition, was the CEO of Titan Corp. Richard stepped forward, hand extended, oblivious to Victoria's distress. Mr. Park, what an honor. We've been so excited about this partnership. May I introduce our Vice President of Development, Victoria Chen. She's been the driving force behind this entire deal. Daniel's eyes met hers, and she saw that same knowing smile from a week ago. Ms. Chen and I are actually already acquainted. Aren't we, Victoria? She forced herself to breathe, to smile, to extend her hand professionally. Mr. Park, what a surprise. His handshake was firm, professional, completely devoid of the warmth she remembered. The pleasure is mine. Shall we proceed with the signing? The ceremony passed in a blur. Victoria signed where indicated, smiled for photos, accepted congratulations, all while her mind raced frantically. How had she not known? How had he hidden this? When had this happened? The pieces started falling into place. The tech hobby in the garage, his calm acceptance of the divorce, his cryptic parting words, the strange smile. He'd known all along that this deal was coming, that they would meet again like this. Ms. Chen, an assistant touched her elbow. The celebration dinner is starting. Everyone's moving to the restaurant. Victoria nodded mechanically. The dinner, of course. The celebration dinner where she'd planned to bask in her triumph, to network with the Titan Corp executives, to cement her position as Chen Industries' rising star. Now it felt like walking toward her own execution. The restaurant was Le Bernardin, one of New York's most exclusive establishments. The private dining room glowed with candlelight, the table set with crystal and fine china. Victoria found herself seated directly across from Daniel. No, Mr. Park. She had to think of him as Mr. Park now. The first courses arrived, and conversation flowed around her. Richard was regaling the Titan Corp executives with stories of Chen Industries' early days. Daniel spoke occasionally, his comments insightful and measured, revealing a business acumen Victoria had never witnessed during their marriage, or had she simply never bothered to look. Victoria barely tasted the appetizer, some delicate seafood creation that normally would have delighted her. Across the table, Daniel was discussing market trends with Richard, his demeanor completely professional. It was as if their 7-year marriage had never existed, as if she were just another business associate. The denial and shock were starting to give way to anger. How dare he humiliate her like this? He could have told her. Should have told her. Instead, he'd let her mock him, belittle him, divorce him, all while knowing he held the keys to her biggest career achievement. She drained her wine glass, and immediately a server appeared to refill it. She barely glanced at him. Just another faceless member of the waitstaff that populated her world of power lunches and business dinners. More wine, ma'am? The server asked. Obviously, she snapped. Her nerves were frayed, her composure cracking. She needed to regain control of this situation somehow. The server poured, his hand steady. Victoria noticed he was wearing an expensive watch, odd for waitstaff. But she dismissed the thought. Her focus was on Daniel, on figuring out how to salvage her dignity from this disaster. Daniel was laughing at something Richard said, completely at ease. The sound of his laughter ignited something dark inside her. He was enjoying this, enjoying watching her squirm. "Tell me, Mr. Park," she heard herself saying, her voice cutting through the conversation. "How does someone go from unemployed to CEO in 6 months? It seems improbable." The table fell silent. Richard shot her a warning look, but Victoria didn't care anymore. The wine was flowing through her veins, mixing with her anger and humiliation. Daniel's expression remained pleasant. "I was never unemployed, Ms. Chen. I founded Titan Corp 8 years ago, shortly after graduating from MIT. We started in Silicon Valley, focused on cloud infrastructure and AI solutions. I kept a low profile, preferred to let the technology speak for itself. 8 years. Their entire marriage." Victoria felt sick, I see, she managed. "And you never thought to mention this? To anyone?" "I value my privacy," Daniel said simply. "And I learned early on that people treat you differently when they know you have money. I preferred to be judged on my character rather than my bank account." The implication hung in the air. Victoria had judged him and found him wanting, based on exactly what he'd feared. She'd divorced him for being poor, for lacking ambition, for wasting his time on meaningless projects. And all along he'd been building an empire. "How wonderfully philosophical," Victoria said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She reached for her wine glass again, her hand shaking slightly. The server appeared at her elbow. "Would you care for— Can't you see I'm in the middle of a conversation?" Victoria turned on him, her frustration finding a convenient target. "Just stand over there until you're needed. Don't hover, Victoria," Richard said quietly, warning in his tone. But she was beyond caring about propriety. The server stepped back, and Victoria caught sight of his face for the first time. There was something in his eyes, pity, contempt. It enraged her further. "You know what I find interesting, Mr. Park," she continued, turning back to Daniel. "This entire deal. You must have known from the beginning that Chen Industries was my company. You must have known we'd end up in a room together eventually. Was this all some kind of revenge plot? Some pathetic attempt to embarrass me?" Daniel set down his fork carefully. "Victoria, I think you've had enough wine." "Don't you dare tell me what I've had enough of." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her wine glass wobbled and she grabbed it, clutching it like a lifeline. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Playing the humble genius, the misunderstood artist. You let me divorce you without saying a word about who you really were. What kind of person does that?" "The kind who wanted to see if they were loved for themselves or their money," Daniel said quietly. His eyes meeting hers across the table held genuine sadness. "I guess I got my answer." The words struck her like a physical blow. Around the table, executives stared at their plates, desperately uncomfortable. Richard had gone pale. "Victoria, perhaps we should—" he started. But Victoria was beyond reason. The humiliation, the anger, the dawning realization of what she'd thrown away. It all coalesced into a white-hot rage. She raised her wine glass, intending to take another defiant sip, but her hand was shaking too badly. The server stepped forward again. "Ma'am, why don't I take that— Get away from me!" Victoria whirled on him, and in her fury and instability the wine glass tilted. The Chateau Margaux, probably a $600 bottle at Le Bernardin, cascaded through the air in what seemed like slow motion. Victoria watched, horrified, as the deep red liquid arced from her glass and splashed directly onto the server's crisp white shirt. The entire table gasped. The wine spread across the fabric like blood, staining it irreparably. Victoria stood frozen, her empty glass still extended, her mind finally catching up to what her emotions had just caused. I didn't mean—" she stammered. The server looked down at his ruined shirt, then back up at her. And that's when Victoria really saw him for the first time. He wasn't just any server. His posture was too confident, his bearing too self-assured. And that watch on his wrist, she recognized it now. A Patek Philippe, worth at least $50,000. "Who are you?" she whispered. Daniel spoke from behind her, his voice carrying a note of resignation. "Victoria, I'd like you to meet Marcus Chen, Richard's son." He's been working his way up through every department of Chen Industries, starting from the ground floor. This month, he's been shadowing the restaurant's operations to understand client hospitality. Marcus, her boss's son, heir apparent to Chen Industries, smiled politely despite the wine dripping from his shirt. It's fine, really. Accidents happen. But Victoria could see in his eyes that he knew this was no accident. This was exactly what it looked like. A powerful executive abusing someone she perceived as beneath her. Richard had risen from his seat, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Marcus, go change. We'll discuss this later. He turned to Victoria, and she'd never seen such disappointment in his eyes. My office. Tomorrow morning. First thing. The celebration dinner had transformed into a wake. Executives made awkward small talk, trying to salvage the evening. Victoria sank back into her chair, the reality of what she'd done crashing over her in waves. She'd just assaulted her boss's son in front of the CEO of their biggest partner company. Her ex-husband, who she'd divorced a week ago for being a failure. Daniel was watching her, and in his expression she saw pity mixed with something else. Vindication, perhaps. He'd predicted this. You always were bad at reading people, he'd said. And he'd been right, she'd read him wrong. Read their entire marriage wrong. She'd seen a dreamer when she should have seen a visionary. She'd seen failure where there was actually extraordinary success. And in her blindness, she'd revealed everything ugly about herself. Mr. Park, Richard said heavily. I apologize profusely for this incident. I assure you. It's Daniel, please. Daniel interrupted gently. And there's no need to apologize. But I think we should discuss the terms of our partnership more carefully. Victoria's head snapped up. What do you mean? Daniel's eyes met hers. This deal was negotiated primarily with you, Ms. Chen. You've been the face of Chen Industries throughout this process. But after tonight, I have serious concerns about whether you represent the values that Titan Corp wants in a partner. You can't pull out of the deal, Victoria said, panic rising in her throat. The contracts are signed. It's done. There's a morality clause, Daniel said quietly, standard in all Titan Corp agreements. It allows us to withdraw from partnerships with companies whose representatives engage in discriminatory behavior, harassment, or abuse of service workers. I would say that pouring wine on someone qualifies. The room spun. Victoria gripped the edge of the table. $800 million. Her career. Her reputation. Everything she'd sacrificed her marriage for, everything she'd worked for, crumbling because of one moment of lost control. Daniel, please, she said, and hated how her voice broke on his name. I made a mistake. I was upset. I wasn't thinking. You were thinking exactly what you always think, Daniel said, not unkindly. That people are only worth as much as their perceived status. That waiters and failed husbands and anyone who doesn't meet your standards of success can be treated with contempt. He paused. I spent 7 years hoping you'd see people, see me differently. But you never did. Richard cleared his throat. Mr. Park, Daniel, perhaps we could discuss this privately. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that satisfies everyone. Daniel nodded slowly. Perhaps. But I need to be honest with you, Richard. The reason I agreed to this deal in the first place was complicated. Part of it was genuine business opportunity. But part of it, he glanced at Victoria. Part of it was wanting to understand if Victoria had divorced me because of who I was, or because of who she thought I was. Tonight gave me that answer. This is insane, Victoria said, finding her voice again. You manipulated this entire situation. You let me divorce you, you let me think you were nobody, all to set up some elaborate test. That's sick, Daniel, is it? Daniel's voice remained calm. You were planning to divorce me anyway, Victoria. You told me that night, told me I was dead weight holding you back. If I'd revealed who I really was, would you have stayed? Would you have loved me again, or would you have just loved my money? Victoria opened her mouth but found she had no answer. Marcus returned wearing a new shirt provided by the restaurant. He approached Victoria carefully as one might approach a volatile animal. Ms. Chen, I accept your apology. I didn't apologize, Victoria said automatically, then caught herself. I mean, I am sorry. I'm very sorry. That was inexcusable. Yes, Marcus agreed simply. It was. The dinner ended shortly after with polite but strained goodbyes. Richard informed Victoria she was suspended pending an investigation and left with Marcus, his disappointment palpable. The other executives scattered quickly, eager to escape the awkwardness. Victoria found herself alone in the restaurant's lobby, her career in tatters, her life unraveling. She should call her lawyer, start damage control, begin spinning the narrative, but for the first time in her adult life, she had no idea what to do. Victoria. She turned to find Daniel standing behind her, his driver waiting by a black Mercedes. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, really looked, perhaps for the first time in years. "Are you really going to destroy the deal?" she asked. "Destroy Chen Industries because of me?" "I haven't decided yet," Daniel said honestly. "But I want you to understand something. This was never about revenge. I didn't create Titan Corp to get back at you. I built it because I loved the work, because I believed in what we were creating. You were right about one thing. I was obsessed with my tech hobby, but you were wrong about why." "Then why did you hide it from me?" The question burst out of her. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember when we met? In college?" Victoria nodded. "Computer science and business administration. You were the quiet genius, I was the ambitious networker. You told me that night at the campus coffee shop that you'd dated 3 different guys in high school, all of them wealthy. You laughed about it, said you had a type, and I thought, I didn't want to be a type. I wanted to be chosen for myself." The memory was fuzzy, buried under years of accumulated resentments, but Victoria could recall it, young and foolish, trying to sound sophisticated, showing off her connections to wealthy classmates. "So you lied to me for 7 years?" "I never lied," Daniel corrected. "I just didn't advertise. I drove a modest car, wore normal clothes, lived in a nice but not extravagant apartment. You assumed I was struggling because I didn't flaunt wealth, and I let you assume because I wanted to see if you'd love me anyway." "That's not fair," Victoria said, but the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. "Maybe not," Daniel agreed. "But Victoria, I tried to tell you so many times. The night before our wedding, I almost came clean. But you were talking about how you'd married me despite my prospects, how you believed in me even though I hadn't made it yet. You were so proud of yourself for looking past my supposed poverty. How could I tell you then that it was all a test you were failing?" Victoria felt tears burning behind her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time she'd cried. "So you just let me divorce you?" "You were going to leave me anyway," Daniel said gently. "You said it yourself, I was dead weight. And you know what? Part of me was relieved, because I realized that even if I'd told you the truth, even if you'd stayed, you wouldn't have stayed for me. You'd have stayed for the lifestyle, for the status, for the $800 million deals. Is that so wrong?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "To want success? To want security? No," Daniel said. "But it's wrong to treat people as disposable based on how much money they appear to have. It's wrong to pour wine on servers and mock your spouse for not meeting your standards of success. It's wrong to measure someone's worth by their bank account." Victoria wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm June evening. "I'm not a bad person, Daniel." "I never said you were," Daniel replied. "But you've become someone who does bad things, someone who's lost sight of what matters. The Victoria I fell in love with in college was ambitious, yes, but she was also kind. She volunteered at the homeless shelter. She tutored struggling students for free. She cared about people, not just their status." "That Victoria was naive," Victoria said bitterly. "The corporate world eats people like that alive." "Does it? Or is that just what we tell ourselves to justify becoming cruel?" The question hung between them. A taxi pulled up and an elderly couple emerged, the man helping the woman with gentle care. They moved slowly toward the restaurant, his hand at her elbow, her head leaning slightly toward his shoulder. 50 years of marriage, maybe 60, written in their synchronized movements. Victoria watched them disappear inside and felt something crack in her chest. I threw it all away, didn't I? For what? For this deal that's going to fall through anyway? For a career with a company that's going to fire me? I don't know what's going to happen with Chen Industries, Daniel said. But I do know that you can't build a meaningful life on status and money alone. I tried to show you that, but you weren't ready to see it. And now? Victoria looked at him, really looked at him. The boy she'd fallen in love with was still there, underneath the expensive suit and the CEO title. What happens now? Daniel considered her question. Now you have a choice. You can go back to who you were, spin this story, blame me for manipulating you, find another company that will value your ruthlessness and call it strong leadership. Or you can take a hard look at who you've become and decide if that's really who you want to be. And the deal? I'm meeting with Richard tomorrow. Alone, without you. Daniel's voice was firm but not unkind. The morality clause is real, Victoria. But more than that, I need to know that Chen Industries shares Titan Corp's values. If they're willing to address what happened tonight seriously, if they're willing to implement real changes in their corporate culture, then maybe we can move forward. They'll fire me, Victoria said. It wasn't a question. Probably, Daniel agreed. Or at least remove you from any client-facing role. Richard's not a bad man, but he can't overlook this. Not with his son involved. Victoria nodded slowly. She'd known this the moment the wine left her glass. I should probably go. Victoria, Daniel said as she turned to leave. For what it's worth, I did love you. I loved you through all of it. I just couldn't make you love yourself enough to see past the surface of things. The tears finally spilled over. I'm sorry, she whispered. For all of it. For not seeing you, for the wine, for... Her voice broke. For not being better. I know, Daniel said. And in his eyes she saw not triumph or vindication, but genuine sadness. I hope you find your way back to who you used to be. That Victoria, the real Victoria, was worth knowing. He climbed into his car and drove away, leaving Victoria standing alone under the restaurant's awning. She pulled out her phone, intending to call her lawyer, then stopped. Instead, she opened her contacts and scrolled down to a name she hadn't called in 5 years. Dr. Jennifer Wu. The therapist she'd dismissed as unnecessary when she'd made it. The phone rang twice before Dr. Wu's familiar voice answered. Victoria? Is everything all right? No, Victoria said, and the word felt like liberation. No, it's not. Can I make an appointment? I think I need help. 3 months later, Victoria stood in a small community center in Brooklyn wearing jeans and a simple sweater. The cooking class she was teaching, unemployed and rebuilding her life from scratch, was filled with teenagers from the neighborhood. Kids who reminded her of who she'd been before ambition had consumed everything else. The trick to risotto, she told them, is patience. You can't rush it. You have to add the broth slowly, stirring constantly, waiting for each addition to be absorbed before adding more. A girl named Maya raised her hand. But wouldn't it be faster to just dump it all in at once? Faster, yes, Victoria agreed. But it wouldn't be risotto. It would be rice soup. Sometimes the slow way is the only way to get something right. She'd taken Daniel's words to heart. Therapy had been brutal, confronting the person she'd become, understanding how her drive for success had twisted into something toxic. She'd apologized to Marcus properly in private and had been surprised when he'd accepted. Richard had let her resign instead of firing her, a kindness she hadn't deserved. The deal had gone through after all. Daniel had kept his word, working with Richard to implement new policies at Chen Industries, sensitivity training, anonymous reporting systems, regular culture audits. The company was changing even if Victoria was no longer part of it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Wu. Remember, progress, not perfection. Proud of you. Victoria smiled and returned her attention to the teenagers carefully stirring their pots. She wasn't sure what her future held. Her savings would last maybe another year. She was applying to non-profit organizations, looking for work that actually meant something. It was terrifying and humbling and somehow surprisingly hopeful. As class ended and the students filed out with their containers of risotto, Maya lingered. Ms. Chen, can I ask you something? Of course. My mom says you used to be some big-shot businesswoman. Is that true? Victoria considered the question. I used to think being a big shot was the most important thing in the world. But I was wrong. Being a good person, that's harder and more important than being successful. Maya nodded thoughtfully. My mom also says you messed up really bad and lost everything. Your mom's right about that too, Victoria said honestly. So why are you teaching us to make risotto instead of, running a company? Victoria smiled. Because I'm learning that there are different kinds of success. And maybe the most important kind is becoming someone you're actually proud to be. After Maya left, Victoria cleaned up the kitchen slowly, methodically. Through the window, she could see the Brooklyn streets, far from the Manhattan penthouse she'd once called home. Her apartment now was a studio with a Murphy bed and a hot plate. But it was hers, earned through honest work, free from the weight of compromises she'd made in pursuit of the wrong things. Her phone buzzed again. This time an email. She almost ignored it, then saw the sender. Daniel Park. Victoria, I heard about your teaching work. It sounds meaningful. I also wanted you to know that I'm getting married next spring. Her name is Sarah. She's a public school teacher and she has no idea how much Titan Corp is worth. I finally learned to lead with who I am, not what I have. I hope you're finding your own way forward. You deserve happiness, not the kind you buy or achieve, but the kind you earn by being true to yourself. Wishing you well, Daniel. Victoria read the email 3 times and by the end she was smiling through tears. Not sad tears, not regretful tears, but something cleaner. Acceptance, perhaps. Gratitude that she'd been given the chance to change. Even if the cost had been everything she'd thought she wanted. She typed a simple reply. Thank you for showing me what I needed to see, even when it hurt. Congratulations, she's lucky to have you and I'm glad you're happy. As she walked home through the Brooklyn evening, Victoria thought about wine and risotto, about patience and pride, about the million small choices that had led her from that penthouse to this sidewalk. She'd lost the $800 million deal, her marriage, her career, and her certainty, but somewhere in the wreckage, she'd found something more valuable, a chance to become someone worth knowing again. And that, she realized, was the only deal that had ever really mattered.